Well, and you had some theories about where your picky eating came from, and one of the key guesses was that you were something called a super taster. Aside from just being a cool word and seemingly a cool concept, what exactly is that phenomenon?
Super taster is someone who, for a specific group of taste receptors, they happen to have a more sensitive reaction. Your response to this is turned on, and if you're a super taster, it's turned up to 11. So for me, not a super taster, so I couldn't blame this. My gene is turned on. I can taste the specific bitter compounds, but they don't really bother me that much. I don't taste them as sensitively as a super taster might. Now, the scientists have also found that in a lot of cases, there might be correlation between being sensitive to this area of bitterness and being sensitive to all the other tastes that are out there and maybe even the textures. But it's not 100%. And so for those of us who are not super tasters, genetically speaking, what's our reason? What's our excuse for being a picky eater?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because this is not all about biology. There is a fair amount of psychology involved.
It's unbelievable the amount of psychology that is involved, and not in the, we all need therapy way of thinking, because a lot of this is happening because your body's protecting you and you don't even know it. And as adults, we can understand this. It's called one trial learning. You eat something and it makes you throw up. Maybe not the food itself. Maybe there's external factors. Maybe you're in college and you got drunk and you're throwing up. But what happens is your body has learned that last food, or the food you're thinking of that you ate, is poisonous to you. So you're going to have a reaction to it in the future. It's going to make you gag. It's going to make you feel nauseous just thinking about it. It's the body's way of protecting you from, poisoning yourself. The mind is incredibly powerful in all of this.
One of the things that you discovered is that there are some pretty serious scientists out there who have set out to get to the heart of exactly what you were looking at, the science of picky eating, but it is not necessarily a personal thing for them as it was with you. So what are the compelling scientific reasons that people are examining picky eating?
One of them is, how can we make sure our children are getting the vital nutrients they need to keep them developing and growing? But the one that I was not prepared for when I went to study how to genotype when I was at the Monell Chemical Census Center was really they're trying to find a way for kids to accept their life-saving medication in, for instance, the AIDS cocktail that children born with AIDS need to take. It's extremely bitter. So they're looking for ways to create a bitterness blocker so that these medicines are more palatable, because you can tell an adult you have to take this medicine because if you don't, you'll die. But you can't tell a child that, because they don't get it. The concept isn't there for them. So you have to work on the other side of it, which is make this medicine more acceptable to them. So that for me was kind of a humbling moment to learn. I was all about how can I like foods more? And this was more about how can we save people's lives?
So your own evolution is unusual, maybe, from a picky eater to someone who went to culinary school. That might be a little much for some picky eaters to imagine, but you're right that a more modest goal might just simply be retraining the picky eater in your life?
Yeah, I think that I took mine to a level where I turned it into a career, and that might be, it's not abnormal. I've met other former picky eaters who are full-blown foodies now. But it's not something that every picky eater feels they have to do. It's more about being able to accept more foods into your life. It's about retraining your neurological pathways that have been set to dislike these foods. And it means changing their flavor, changing their texture, changing whatever it is that you really don't like about them, finding the best way to cook them. Like, don't accept that Brussels sprouts have to be steamed, or that spinach has to be steamed, or frankly, that any vegetable has to be steamed. Find the way that makes them taste, that brings out the best in them. Roasting is what I have found to be best with a lot of vegetables. That way, first of all, you're getting the vegetable at its most flavorful. And if you combine it with other flavors that you like, you start to trick your brain into thinking, well, I'm eating this Brussels sprouts, but really what I'm tasting, for instance, is the bacon. Once you're no longer scared of the Brussels sprouts taste and your body's not in that fight or flight mode of just get me the hell away from this plate of Brussels sprouts, you can start to appreciate the Brussels sprouts for what they are and their flavor. And I know that for some picky eaters that sounds like there's no way. Those things, they stink, they're awful. But it can happen. It's kind of sneaks up on you, and you relax your guard. And in fact, relaxation and just being sort of chill about it is so much a part of it, because if you're tense, if you're scared, it happens to be impeding your acceptance of that food too.
At the same time, though, you look at the list of the things that you still do not care for. Is there anything inherently wrong with not liking coleslaw or flan? This is not an evolutionary disadvantage to dislike those things.
Yeah, I certainly don't think so, because frankly, raisins and flan and so on, they're gross. So I don't have a problem anymore because it's not affecting my health and it's not affecting my social life, which is what scientists or psychologists will define as being a quote-unquote disorder. I just prefer things now in a certain way. It's not to say I won't eat them if I have to, and they certainly don't get to me the way they used to, but I tend to avoid them if I can. I don't order them off a dessert menu. I don't eat bananas. My son does, my husband does, but I don't. I don't cook with them. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, because I think all of us can come up with foods that we don't like, and we might be surprised at how many foods we don't like, and for whatever the reasons are. So no, there's nothing wrong with disliking foods. There's nothing wrong with being a picky eater. What I want to be the biggest takeaway from the book is that being a picky eater is not a choice. This is biology. This is genetics. This is who we or who you are. And whatever the reasons are, even the scientists can't figure out. No picky eater is doing this to bother you or make you do more work. This is quite honestly something that is impossible for some people to control. And it's like, again, I relate it to color preference. It's either you like the color brown or you don't, and no one really gets into a flap about that. I honestly believe there's nothing wrong with disliking food. If it starts to affect your health, then maybe you might want to try and find a way to deal with it. And they're now starting to do studies with adults, because they've done studies with kids to get kids to have more food acceptance. And now they're realizing that, well, adults out there are suffering, and we don't hear about it because adults believe I'm supposed to grow out of this. This is immature of me. Well, that's not quite the case. And so now they're trying to find ways of maybe developing research to help adults deal with it.
Well, Stephanie Lucianovic, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing this really interesting story.
Thank you so much, Mitch. I appreciate it.
He's got superpowers. He is a super taster. Every flavor explodes.
Stephanie Lucianovic is the author of Suffering Succotash, a picky eater's quest to understand why we hate the foods we hate, published by Perigee. She's a native of our neighbor to the west, Minnesota, but now lives in California, where she is also the proprietor of her website, Grub Reports. Keep listening one last break, and then we'll catch up with Milwaukee's own, the talented singer-songwriter Patty Larkin. This is Lake Effect from WUWM.
Can't shut his mouth, 'cause he's a super taster. Though he looks like a man, he is a super taster. Can't drink coffee or beer, 'cause he's a super taster. Loves ice cream.